Hey there, my name is Joe Gilder from HomeStudioCorner.com. I want to talk to you quickly about Reverb. I just finished shooting a longer video for a project I'm doing with Khalik Glover, all about mixing with effects, but I wanted to do a free video for YouTube as well and talk a little bit about something I talked about more in depth in that video, and that's the idea of choosing the right reverb for the situation. So I've got a song here, and it's a ballad, and I wanted a reverb that would give me a nice tail on the end of the vocal and the snare drum and the organ specifically. And this is the sound I ended up with. So let's take a listen. So when I muted it there at the end, you heard how much reverb was taken away, how much it's a pretty core part of the overall tone. You mostly hear it on the snare drum. It gives a nice tail to the end of it. Now, what I want to talk about is the two types of reverbs I tend to use. The first, and I'll switch over to this one, is a room style reverb. This is what you're used to hearing. It sounds like a particular room. This one is supposed to sound like a medium-sized studio. Now, I've set these reverbs, I'll talk about what this one is in a second, but I've set these reverbs to the exact same decay time. So they're at 2.15 seconds. A longer decay for a ballad type song seems to work. Now listen to the difference here. I'll play this reverb for you with the same decay time, except this is a medium room setup, and then I'll go back and show you the first one. So here's what that sounds like. So with the exact same amount of the instruments going to the reverb, this one we don't hear as well. It's still there, but it's not working as well for me. I'll come back to that in a second. So the first reverb that we used was a plate, okay? A plate reverb. It's set up in this particular reverb as basically a room that's 1 meter wide, which is essentially the same characteristics as a metal plate would have. So whatever reverb you use, it most likely will have some sort of plate inside. And what you'll notice if you just look at the difference between the graphs here, the plate doesn't have any sort of these vertical lines, okay, which represent early reflections, which early reflections are what make a room sound like a room. It's what makes a small room sound different from a large room aside from the actual decay time itself. Well, in this mix, I didn't really want to add any sort of a room sound to the drums. I just wanted to add a tail. A plate is a great way to do that. You get no early reflections. You only get the decaying sound of a reverb. Let me solo the reverb for you so you can hear that. So you're not really getting the sense of a certain size room, you're just hearing the tail. It's a fake reverb because you're only hearing the tail part and not the room part, which is why plate reverbs can be so helpful. On the flip side, here's the sound of that room reverb where you can hear the sound bouncing around the room in addition to the actual decay itself. Now, upon initial listen, you might say, well, that one sounds better, Joe. And by itself in solo, it does, actually. You hear it sounds more natural. You hear the drum bouncing off the sides of the walls and the floor and the ceiling, and it sounds more natural, and you also hear the decay. The problem, though, is how it works in the mix. So in the mix, I'll flip between these two. The top one is the plate, the bottom one is the snare. The bottom one is the room. Listen to how the snare sounds differently with each. I'll start with the plate, and then I'll switch to the room. To me, it's a subtle difference, and this is one of those videos where I was afraid it was going to get subtle, but hopefully you can hear this over YouTube. The snare does sound different. It's a different sound. It gets a little thicker and a little muddier with the room sound because that sound is bouncing around the room. Whereas with the plate, you're hearing the direct snare sound, which is a little brighter, and then you're hearing the decay, so the snare stays bright. Now, I tend to want a thick snare, and if this was a heavy rock song, I'd go for the room reverb, most likely. But in this one, I'm going with the plate because I want that tail end to be there, and I want everything else to remain kind of untouched. So the actual hit of the snare sounds like it does without reverb, and we're just adding on a tail to the end. If you've never experimented with using a plate reverb, I encourage you to do it. It works great on drums, can work really well on guitars and vocals as well. It's another tool to add to your arsenal. Hope that was helpful for you. Thanks again for being a subscriber and for listening. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, you can do so below. Also, click around. You'll probably find links to my Twitter profile, Facebook, Snapchat. My handle over there is Joe Gilder Music. I would love to connect with you there as well. That's it. See you next week. Bye.